Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Kagabine with the Garland County Library, and I'm here tonight with Mary Zunick, who's the Hot Springs Sister City Program Director and Honorary Consul of Japan for Arkansas. She's here tonight to present to you all about the relationship between Hot Springs and our sister city, Hanamaki, Japan. And there's also some very special guests that are going to pop in our program a little later, and Mary's going to introduce them here shortly. So we plan for this to be the first of an ongoing series of virtual events about all things Japan. So please stay tuned for future programs, and if anyone has any suggestions for those, I'm sure Mary would love to hear them. And also, if anyone has questions or comments during the program tonight, don't be shy. I know Mary here will be happy to give a lengthy answer for them. She's a very thorough person. So thank you for joining us, Mary. And I'm going to let you take over, and of course, I'll be monitoring on the other side if you need anything. So.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Paul. I think what he just said was that I'm going to talk a lot. I am Mary Zunick, the director of the
Sister. This is a good thing.
Pardon? Oh, okay. Yeah, you say that now. I have been the director of the Sister City program since 2008. I was hired just after the 15th anniversary. We have been sister cities with Hanamaki, Japan since 1993. And as Paul mentioned, in 2018, I was appointed the Honorary Consul of Japan for Arkansas by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I just want to start by saying what a privilege and an honor it is to serve as the director of the Sister City program and the Honorary Consul of Japan. I've learned so much from, as I said, I joined the program 15 years in, but there have been a tremendous amount of dedicated board members and volunteers and city support, people who have a real passion for this Sister City program, both here in Hot Springs and in Hanamaki as well. But before we go any further, because we are going into our 28th year right now, before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge one of the persons who was very instrumental in the success of this program, Mickey Halsey. She passed away last week. She moved to the U.S. from her home country of Japan, Yokohama, and was instrumental in the success of the program by providing hospitality and as a volunteer. So please remember her family, the Vernon Halsey and Janet Cheek, all who have been very involved in the program. So when I was talking with Paul about the program and what we should cover for the different series, I thought maybe the best place for us to start is the beginning. And so we'll be talking about the beginning of our Sister City program here in Hot Springs. But before we go into that, I wanted to cover the topic of sister cities. What is a sister city? Where did this concept come from? Before I was involved in this program, I had lived in a city one time where when you drove into town, there was a sign that said they had a sister city, but I really didn't know anything about it other than that. The concept of sister cities began in 1956. So if you think back to 1956, we were in the midst of a Cold War. President Eisenhower delivered a speech that established a program called People to People. And in the speech, he said, if we are going to take advantage of the assumption that all people want peace, then the problem is for people to get together and to leap governments, if necessary, to evade governments, to work out not one method, but thousands of methods by which people can gradually learn a little bit more about each other. And from that concept, the People to People program, over the years, Sister Cities International was developed. It's an American nonprofit, which was founded in President Eisenhower's speech over 62 years ago. And the goal is for that organization to be a champion for peace and prosperity by fostering bonds among people from around the world. People to people, or some call it citizen diplomacy, enhances the ability for people from different cultures to understand, appreciate, and celebrate their differences while building partnerships that advance the interests of all humankind. And so what is a sister city? A sister city can be a city, a county, or even a state. It's very broad-based. It's a long-term partnership between two communities in two different countries, and it's officially recognized when the highest elected or appointed official in city signs an agreement to become sister cities. That happened for Hot Springs and Hanamaki back in 1993. We have one sister city here in Hot Springs, Hanamaki, but a city can have different sister cities. For example, Hanamaki has several sister cities, and they can be made up of all city staff, or there can be just a few volunteers or dozens of volunteers. There can be nonprofits, municipal governments, the private sector, or other civic organizations involved as well. Here in Hot Springs, I work for Visit Hot Springs, so we have Visit Hot Springs in the city, and then we also have the Hot Springs National Park Sister City Foundation, which has a board of directors and supports the nonprofit work of student exchange, citizen exchange, hospitality, celebrating Japanese culture. That's the Sister City Foundation. And we'll cover more about the different exchanges and the programs that the Sister City Foundation and our Sister City program sponsors and supports in coming episodes of this. So each sister city, like ours, we're all independent, and we pursue activities that are kind of thematic, depending from, it varies from sister city to sister city. They can be trade related. Some cities have a company from a different country built there, so they're sister cities with someone in that country, with the city in the home country of that company. It can be educational or cultural based. So what Sister Cities International does, this national nonprofit, they help match up cities from other countries together, and they also provide resources and grants and training to help facilitate successful connections and sister city programs. So Sister Cities, Sister Cities International looks at what cities would have in common in order to match them up. And sometimes that can be because you have a immigrant community, you can have ancestral or demographic connections, historic connections. It varies a lot. And you'll hear about Hot Springs and Hanamaki. One of the reasons we were paired up is because we both have hot springs. So we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. So this evening, we're going to learn about how we, Hot Springs, became sister cities with Hanamaki, Japan. And we have two very special guests. Actually, we have three guests with us who have first-hand knowledge of the origin of the connection between our two cities. From Hanamaki, we have Ryuji Sato. He was involved in the very beginning of the program as he worked for the city of Hanamaki. And from North Carolina, we'll have former mayor of Hot Springs, Melinda Baran, will be joining us. And I've asked them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about how they were involved in the program. And we'll hear from them and how this whole process began over 28 years ago. So Paul, if you could bring up Ryuji. And Jesse Gutman, and they're interpreting for Ryuji Sato. Ryuji is the head of the Hanamaki Hot Springs Friendship Organization there in Hanamaki. But so I'm going to turn it over to Ryuji and Jesse.
リュウジさんと私に。で、リュウジさんは、何か、自己紹介って感じ
で、自己紹介。
簡単な。
はい。名前は佐藤隆二です。
name is Ryuji Sato.
ホットスプリングスには家族と何度か行っておりますけども、私の母親、妻、2人の息子がホットスプリングスに行って、ホームステイをしたりしてですね、大変お世話になっています。 家族ぐるみで、付き合える関係があることが非常に誇りに思っているところです。
Okay, so he's basically gone over his connection with Hot Springs, and he has he's homestayed in Hot Springs several times, but he's also gone with his family. He's gone with his mother, his wife, 2 of his sons as well, and he's really very indebted to the people of Hot Springs and especially his host families. And he's very proud of the connections that families in the 2 communities have been making.
何回も言ってますけども、あと2、3回は死ぬまでにホットスプリングスに行きたいなと思っています。
So he's thinking that well, before he passes away, that he would like to continue going to Hot Springs maybe 2 or 3 more times. So
自己紹介は
yeah, so that's kind of his self-introduction. Do you want him to talk about his experiences, or how do you want to do this?
Actually, if you would like to talk about your experiences, if we kind of how he was involved in the early days of the Sister City program, and kind of why Hanamaki chose Hot Springs. So how were you involved in the beginning, Ryuji-san?
最初の方からの関わりと、ホットのとのつながりについてお願いします。
花巻市が姉妹都市を持とうという話になったときに、日本国際交流センターに花巻に似ている都市はどこがあるのかなっていうことで調査を依頼して、アメリカの3都市を紹介されています。
Okay, so basically when Hanamaki was originally looking for a sister city, they set out to look for a sister city, and they sent a request to the Japan Center for International Relations for like cities similar to Hanamaki. And they basically received 3 suggestions.
その中で花巻市に一番似ており、姉妹都市提携に積極的であったホットスプリングス市と調査団をお互いに派遣し合い、そして調査の結果、提携することになったっていうふうに記憶しています。
So among those 3 options was, of course, Hot Springs. And they ended up thinking it was most similar, so they decided to send a group of delegates to actually examine the city and see it, firsthand, and help determine if it would be a good match to become sister cities. And of course, the result was that they did think it was a best match for Hanamaki.
その姉妹都市の提携調印式、それは今でも覚えているんですけれども、1993年1月15日、ホットスプリングス市で調印式が行われました。調印式は当時の衛星回線を利用して花巻市の成人式会場で披露されています。私は当時教育委員会で勤務していたことから成人式のスタッフとしてスクリーンの後ろから調印の様子を見ていたことを覚えています。
So we're kind of fast forwarding here to the official signing ceremony. So before we said that they decided that Hanamaki and Hot Springs were the best match, and so they in 1993, specifically January 15th, they held the signing ceremony in Hot Springs. And during the signing ceremony, they actually fed in a satellite video to the coming of age ceremony here. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, it's the ceremony that is held in Japan when people turn, I believe 20 years old? Ryuji Sato. Yeah, when they turn 20 years old. And they have this big ceremony of everybody's becoming an adult. But anyway, they had that ceremony going on, and it just so happened to coincide with the signing ceremony happening in Hot Springs. So they actually fed in a satellite video feed of the signing ceremony in Hot Springs to everybody at the coming of age ceremony in Hanamaki. And he remembers specifically, like very vividly, that time because he was working for the Board of Education. At that time, the Board of Education was kind of like part of the city department that he was working in after, but we'll talk about that later. And so he remembers vividly, there was this big screen at the signing ceremony, or at the coming of age ceremony, and everybody was watching it on one side. And since he was a staff, he was on the other side of the screen, kind of watching it himself.
Wonderful. So when did you first come to Hot Springs?
初めてホットスプリングスに来た。
1997年の1月に中学生の研修で、初めて、ホットスプリングスに行きました。当時は商工会議所で、歓迎式が行われたんですけれども、大きな歓迎フラッグを掲げて、そして一人一人をハグで出迎えてくれたミリー・パトリックさんの印象が非常に強く残っています。そして、歓迎式の後、ホストファミリーが優しく迎え入れてくれて、それぞれの家にホームステイをしていました。
So the first time that he came to Hot Springs was in January of 1997 with a group of middle schoolers, actually. He was kind of like one of the chaperones for the middle schoolers. And he remembers that he had a really like enthusiastic reception at the Chamber of Commerce in Hot Springs. And they had this huge welcome banner, and Millie Patrick welcomed each person one by one with lots of hugging. And that really left a strong impression with him. And so after the reception, he remembers that all the host families gave like really warm welcomes, and everybody eventually split up into their individual host families to head home for the night.
Cool, very good. And what I thought we might do is now hear a little bit from Melinda about what was happening here in Hot Springs, and then we'll come right back to Ryuji Sato after that. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Paul, can you, and joining us from her home now in North Carolina, former mayor of Hot Springs, Melinda Baran. Good evening, Melinda.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be talking with you, Mary. Hello, Hot Springs and Hanamaki.
And you heard you heard a little bit about what Ryuji was saying about what was happening in Hanamaki. Could you tell us what was happening in the early 90s here in Hot Springs that made us want to seek a sister city?
Okay, well, actually, I need to back up for about a decade. As everybody in Hot Springs knows, we went through a change of government in 1986. We had an election. And we changed everything. Basically, the people of Hot Springs wanted to go to planning and professional government and service before self, and the city directors, who all serve for free, the ones who were elected, and I was very happy to make the transition from the old city government to the new city government. We had a lot of things we had to do. A lot of things needed to be fixed. And one of the first things we did was to decide what we wanted to do and what we wanted to be as a city. And that process back then was called Vision and Action. And the entire community took part of it. And we identified the things that we needed to fix. But more importantly, we wanted to create the vision of what and who we wanted to be as a community, as a city, as people. And embedded in that Vision and Action program was economic development, good government, a great relationship with our educational systems, our Chamber of Commerce, just a comprehensive improvement of Hot Springs. So from 1986 to about 1990 to 91, we got a lot of things done. And I guess I call it serendipity, because ring, ring, ring. I got a phone call from Jim Cherry, who was the president of the Chamber of Commerce. And he said, guess what, Melinda? We've gotten a phone call from Little Rock, the Economic Development Agency for the state of Arkansas, said, we would like you to think about having a sister city. And I said, oh, okay, where? And he said, Hanamaki, Japan. I said, well, that's certainly interesting. And remember, this was 1991. This was 50 years after December 7th, 1941. It was a period of time when a lot of people were very emotional, let's put it that way, for many reasons. And I was one of them. My husband was a World War II veteran. My father was at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. But the wonderful thing about John Baran, my husband, was he said, you know, I think this is a great idea. It's time to become friends, to reach out. And where better to start than someplace in Japan? So I talked with my fellow directors and I said, we got this opportunity. What do you think? And they said, well, we won't know until we hear the story. So we followed through and invited the Hanamaki delegation, the search committee, and it arrived, I think, in February of 91. Charming group of people, absolutely wonderful. They didn't really speak English, and obviously we didn't speak Japanese, but we merged and we made quick friends. And I have a lot of very, very warm memories of the 4 days that we initially spent together. And at the end of that visit, the delegation chairman said, we would like to extend a formal invitation to you and representatives of Hot Springs to come to Hanamaki in September for the 400th anniversary of our city. We have a big festival and it's going to be 4 days and you're going to have a great time. And I said, oh, okay, why not? So we put together a delegation, and from all parts of Hot Springs, I think there were about 20 of us. And the fact that initially charmed us was that they had hot water too. And they had flowers, and they had culture and music and all the things that we were looking for beyond just jobs and infrastructure and the basic things necessary to fix our town and make it grow and become a desirable place to live. Well, we all went and flew into Tokyo, and we were met by Hanamaki representatives, and we took the bullet train north to Hanamaki. And we were all wide-eyed and didn't really know what we were doing, and we're kind of making it up as we go along. And we rolled into the train station, and what did we see? About 300 or 400 people, the high school band, cheerleaders, very important people in Japan, music, and a lot of speeches. And we were just overwhelmed. We had no idea this was going to be happening. So from there until the end of 4 days later, we saw everything. We met over 100 people. We discovered Rotary was there. We visited their schools. We had our first onsen, the hot water experience. And our attitude was, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So when in Japan, do as the Japanese do. And that was a great experience. It really was. And our delegation went with the opportunity to come back and tell the full city board and the people of Hot Springs what we really felt, and where we think we ought to go with this first sister city experience. And at the end of the visit, we indicated that yes, we would go back to Hot Springs, and yes, we would recommend that we establish this relationship, and we'll let you know as soon as we take a vote on it. So we went back, and I believe in the end of September, the city board took a vote, and it was unanimous, and that's how Sister City started in 1986. No, 19, I'm sorry, excuse me, 1992, 93. Yes, okay. I get my 80s and my 90s mixed up. So we said, we went back with an initial memorandum of agreement, and we approved that. And then we invited the representatives from Hanamaki to Hot Springs for January 15th, 1993, to formally, as I told the mayor then, get married. And that's essentially what we did. I even gave the mayor a little ring with some diamonds in it as a token of our engagement in marriage as two cities who would spend a lot of time and hopefully would have a very, very long future together. And that's how it started on our side.
Absolutely. It's so interesting to hear that that was broadcast live in Hanamaki, and that it was, such the immediate response there, and just that it was embraced by the city board. And I didn't realize that it started from the state level, that the state reached out to us and encouraged, because if you think about what was happening here in Arkansas in the early 90s, Bill Clinton was governor, and obviously with higher political aspirations after that even, and then of course the economy in Japan, kind of what a perfect marriage. An Arkansas city with a Japanese sister city. And I want to ask Ryuji-san, are you still there, Ryuji-san? We heard about your very first trip here. What impressed you about your host family and what were the people of Hot Springs when you were here in 97?
ホットに、1997年頃にいた時に、何が印象残りましたか？ホストファミリーとの経験とかもお願いします。
まず一番関心っていうかびっくりしたのは、ホットスプリングスショッピングモールの玄関で同齢のご婦人の方に声をかけられたことでした。
One of the things that immediately stands out to him is when he went there at that time, he actually remembers a specific conversation with a kind of an older lady at the entrance to Hot Springs Mall.
Are you Korean, Chinese, Japanese? I'm Japanese. Oh, Hanamaki, yes. Welcome to Hot Springs. それあとは分かりません。残念ながら私には理解できませんでしたけれども、当時まだ、姉妹都市になってから4年しか経ってない中で、ホットスプリングスの方々が花巻市を知っていただいていたことに大変感動しました。
So yeah, you probably caught half of that, but just to reiterate, the conversation went. She asked basically, are you Korean or are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? And he said, I'm Japanese. And she said, oh, Hanamaki. And he said, yes. And then she said, welcome to Hot Springs. And then a bunch of other stuff that he unfortunately couldn't understand after that point. But so yeah, he didn't understand that, but he was really impressed that just like a regular citizen off the street in Hot Springs, and not even 4 years had passed yet, but with this relationship between the two cities, and just this person randomly met outside of the mall knew about Hanamaki, and that really kind of moved him at that time.
また、その時に初めてホームステイをしましたけども、バーナン&ジニーのところにホームステイをしましたが、私は和英辞典を、バーナンは英和辞典を持って、お互いに家族とか仕事のことを紹介し合いました。時間にすれば2時間30分話していたんですけども、あっという間の出来事で夜遅くまで話し込んでいたことを覚えています。今まで、バーナンのホルシー家には10回以上ホームステイをしていますけども、言葉は通じなくても、お互いに理解し合えるっていうことは、お互いに理解し合おうと思えば心はつながるなっていうふうに感じています。
So, just switching gears to like kind of his experience with host families here. He experienced his first homestay in January of 1997 at Vernon and Virginia Halsey's home. And at the time, they both had English to Japanese and Japanese to English dictionaries, respectively, right, that they carried around with them. And so they were somewhat able to start talking about each other's families and work. And they started this conversation, and it was like the blink of an eye, and it was already, 2-3 hours later, and they were just talking straight late into the night. And, he's got really good memories of things like that. And by this point, he stayed at their home over 10 times. So it really feels like even if we can't speak each other's language, we can still come together to try to understand each other, and that's how we really connect.
And Melinda, when you went with the delegation to Japan, did you homestay, or what was that first trip like? What all did you?
Well, the first trip for me and John, we did homestay, one overnight stay. We stayed in a hotel and homestay, and there, brace yourself, but that was my first introduction to Japanese plumbing in the bathroom. And I'll tell this joke on me. We had our interpreters, our famous artist, Owen Hutt, and his lovely wife were staying with us to translate during our homestay. And we stayed with the head of the delegation, head of the association, who was kind of responsible for taking us around. Well, in the middle of the night, like most women do, had to get up, and I thought I had been given the proper lesson in how to use the facility, and I pushed the wrong button. Oh, it was so embarrassing, but everybody laughed. And after that, I thought, Lord, if they can overlook that, they can overlook anything. Well, this is great. And it was just heartwarming everywhere. Everybody was thoughtful, was responsive. Now, the rest of the delegation got to experience the one thing I didn't get to do. I didn't get to go to the parade because my husband was handicapped. He was, 70 years old. And by the end of a very long, strenuous days where we had constant travel and then speeches and all of that sort of thing, he was exhausted. So I stayed in, and I thought, I'll never see another parade. But I went to Hanamaki with you and Robert and all the rest of the wonderful 25th anniversary delegation. And gosh, I was in the parade, and it was incredible. I have never seen anything so beautiful, so enthusiastic in all my life. The floats put Pasadena New Year's parade to shame. They aren't that great. and the food was wonderful, and the scenery and the visits, and I am so glad that Hanamaki is Hot Springs' sister. Yeah. But, you know, looking back, I've been gone from Hot Springs since 1998. But I keep up with everything that's going on. And I go back and visit friends and family. And I am so pleased that this sister city relationship has spread. It spread beyond the schools. It spread beyond business. It spread into everybody's hearts and homes. And young children who started are now young adults with children of their own. And I think probably in another 10 years, we'll start seeing the grandchildren visiting Hot Springs and Hanamaki. And that's a tie that can't be broken. And that's, I think, is the best reason that the Hot Springs Hanamaki Sister City program has been rated twice the best in the United States in 2012 and 2018. Is that right? 2020. Oh, just got it. So that's quite a feather in Hot Springs. Bouquet of good things. And I thank you for making it happen. You've been a phenomenal.
It's a lot of people in both cities to make it happen. And you both really touched on a similar topic there. I think that everybody who travels to visit our sister cities feels, I think, there's that sense of being a little uncomfortable, of that not being able to speak the same language. The students, you know, they get nervous when they get to their house and you're uncomfortable. But then you find that in spite of all those differences, you really have a lot in common as well. And now, Ryuji-san, how many times have you been to Hot Springs? Will you tell us about some of your Hot Springs experiences here?
私のパスポートを私の妻がチェックしました。そうしたらホットスプリングスには19回行ってるそうです。
His wife actually checked his passport. He's been to Hot Springs 19 times, according to that.
You should become an honorary citizen of Hot Springs.
本当の市民なった方がいいかな。
Now, do you usually stay with the same host family? Do you have kind of a family that you've connected with here?
普段は同じファミリーと泊まってますか？ホームステイしますか？
ほとんどがね、ほとんど。
Most of the time, same family, yeah.
And have they shared any advice with you, or is there, that you over the years?
何かホストファミリーからのアドバイスとか話がありましたか？
私は英語は話できませんでした。それで、初めの頃、仕事で、ホットスプリングスに中学生を連れてったり、5周年の市民訪問団と一緒に行ったわけですけれども、ジャネット・チークさんから忠告がありまして、日本人はすぐにイエスと答えると。十分話の内容を確認して答えるように、中途半端な英語は使ってダメよ。通訳さんのよく話を聞いてから答えなさいというふうに忠告をされています。しかし、普段の会話では私はいつもI can't speak English と話しますけども、ホットスプリングスの方々も I can't speak Japanese と答えてくれて、それで、単語と手振り身振りで会話できることをすごく楽しく感じています。それはやはり姉妹都市交流が進んでお互いを理解しようとする 結果だっていうふうに思っています。
So yeah, basically he's gone over there a bunch of times, like as chaperone for students. So he's gone over for student delegations, and for example, during the 5th anniversary celebration with citizen delegation. So he's gone over a bunch of times, but among all of that, he still remembers something specifically that Janet Cheek told him, especially in the early days. And she said basically something like, a lot of Japanese people would often just immediately answer yes to everything without fully understanding what they were being told in English. And so she told him, look, don't go nuts using half-baked English. If you really can't speak English, listen carefully to the interpreter and then say what you want to say. And so that kind of really stuck with him as like useful advice or something important about communication. So even now, he makes sure that like when he has something important to talk about, that he does so through an interpreter. In just everyday conversation, he usually just says, I can't speak English. And for example, people on the Hot Springs side might also say, well, I can't speak Japanese. Yeah. But in those cases, when he doesn't have an interpreter or whatever, if it's just, conversation, making friends, they just end up having fun through, throwing in words that each other might understand and using gestures and just really trying to communicate with each other. So overall, he thinks that the Sister City Exchange has kind of progressed to what it is today because everybody tries to understand each other, like despite those communication issues.
Yeah, very, very true. That's now, Melinda, do you have any experiences like that, or just connections that you had from your trip to Japan, either the first time or the second time, that really stand out as a cultural experience?
From my first visit or the second one?
Either one.
Either one. Okay. Well, it was really, really wonderful to meet Mayor Ueda. He, of course, is fluent in English, but he is a lawyer and he worked in New York. But visiting him as a peer, elected official and so forth, in his office in City Hall for Hanamaki, it was interesting to see how much pride he has in the Sister City program. And it shows on the walls. He has hung artwork, and he expressed a lot of almost sentimental connection to Hanamaki's two sister cities, Rutledge, which was a small town, and Hot Springs, which is a much larger one. And both of the sister cities are very different. But Mayor Ueda is providing the leadership for Hanamaki that is needed to make the program a success for the long term. The people who govern Hanamaki are doing an excellent job. They understand the world and how they want to interact with it, and yet still maintain the wonderful traditions of Japanese culture. But they're getting the kids to learn English. They're emphasizing right now with COVID, the healthcare problems. They reacted so beautifully when the tsunami hit, and that gave the people of Hot Springs the opportunity to give back, writing checks and so forth. It's just the thing that I think about are the people. Absolutely every single person I met would be someone I would love to have sitting at my dinner table, having a conversation, and talking about world affairs. That's great.
That's very true. I think that's whether it's city staff in Hanamaki who before we were live on air, everybody was in the room and we were waving to each other because you develop those friendships over the years. Hanamaki traditionally brings a large delegation to Hot Springs every 5 years or so to celebrate the milestone anniversaries of our relationship. And what Melinda was talking about was in the 25th anniversary in 2018, I traveled with a group of 25 citizens from Hot Springs to celebrate in Hanamaki, and then a similar sized delegation came back here in October of 2018. And so each anniversary we celebrate these milestones, but especially those 5th year anniversaries. And Ryuji-san, the first time he came here was for the 5th. Now we've done the cultural exchanges, but I think for the 5th you brought a large group here, didn't you, during those early days of the Sister City program? Can you tell us about that 5th anniversary celebration?
5周年。
Ryuji-san.
1997年の9月に5周年で、ホットスプリングスを訪問しています。その時は、当時の交流委員会のデニス・スミス会長さんが非常に獅子踊りの公演を希望されていました。それで獅子踊りの方々と一緒に市民訪問団として行ったことを覚えています。5周年の主なイベントについては、まず、花巻市民が約90名を超える訪問団となって、5周年のレセプションをはじめ、いろいろなアトラクションで市民交流が行われております。今はもうなくなったのかなと思うんですが、レストランのミセス・ミラーズで、アメリカ南部料理教室を開いたり、ゴルフをしたり、温泉の体験、もしくは日本文化の紹介というような交流がなされています。あと、その時に姉妹校の提携がされておりまして、花巻東高校、レイクサイド高校、笹間第二小学校、ファウンテン小学校の姉妹校の調印式を行っております。あと、獅子踊りについては、コンベンションセンターやレイクサイド学区ですね、小学校から高校生まで約2000人の生徒が見てくれました。あと、ホットスプリングスビレッジも行きましたし、ホットスプリングスショッピングモールも、そこでも獅子踊りを踊っております。あと最後に、ホットスプリングスショッピングモールに特設ブースを設置して、花巻ディスプレイをしております。花巻市を紹介するパネルやポスターの展示、物産展示やお蕎麦の試食など様々な紹介をいたしました。
Okay, so basically he's going over the Sister City 5th anniversary, like you mentioned. He's got a lot of memories from that time, and so this was back in, I believe, September of 1997, and they had the 5th anniversary, and he was one of the things that he was really glad to be able to do was put on a shishi odori performance. Shishi odori is the deer dance, and when they brought over shishi odori deer dancers with their full costumes and everything, and had everybody over there given the chance to really enjoy the actual real performance. And it was especially great, he thinks, for Mr. Dennis Smith because and Mr. Dennis Smith was the head of the exchange committee at that point, and he was really hoping to get some kind of performance from shishi odori over in Hot Springs. So They also did a bunch of other stuff for the 5th anniversary. They actually had over 90 citizens from Hanamaki sent to Hot Springs during that 5th anniversary. There's a lot of people. And they held a bunch of different exchanges and, of course, the anniversary celebration itself. But they also had just a few things that he remembers, like a Southern cooking class. And that was held at Mrs. Miller's restaurant. And he thinks maybe that's not in operation anymore, perhaps, but that's where it was. They also were able to do golfing together, head into the bathhouses for some bathing, and put on like all sorts of different Japanese cultural introductions. And one of the other important things at that time during his visit was sister school signings. And so that's when Hanamaki Higashi High School and Lakeside High School became sister cities. They had their official signing ceremonies, as well as Sasama Daini Elementary and Fountain Lake Elementary. Another thing is, like he said, they had the deer dancers sent over and they gave their performances, but it wasn't just like a one-off kind of thing. The deer dancers actually went around. They went to the convention center to do performance. They went to Lakeside, like around Lakeside School District, and the count that they had from that time was like over 2,000 students total that got to watch the performance. And they also went to Hot Springs Village. They visited some elder care homes. They went to Hot Springs Mall. So the Shishiodori, the deer dancers, really made the rounds around Hot Springs. And that was something that he was really glad that they were able to do. And lastly, one of the other things that he remembers from the 5th anniversary was they were able to put something called like a Hanamaki display. It was this big thing set up at Hot Springs Mall. And they introduced a bunch of things about Hanamaki through like panel exhibits. They had certain Hanamaki products exhibited there, and a soba noodle tasting section as well. So these are, just like kind of off the top of his head, already tons of memories from just the 5th anniversary.
Exactly, and that's such an important part of the Sister City program is the exchange, where you actually have the opportunity to learn firsthand about the culture or the food. And Hanamaki's always done such a wonderful job of that, of sending cultural representatives here, the deer dancers, the craft items that they had at the mall. And if you walk through the convention center now, you see that incredible display of the Shishiodori dancer that's there, that was donated to us, the costume, so that we can share with our citizenry examples of Japanese culture, the culture of our sister city. And so that's something I've always thought that we can do better as here in Hot Springs with sending some of these same cultural representatives to share our culture with our friends in Japan, because only a few people can travel from Hanamaki to Hot Springs to experience our culture. So hopefully in the future, we can even send more people from Hot Springs to share our culture with the people of Hanamaki, so that there's a broader scope of the impact of the program through cultural exchange. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. We have goals to work for when Hanamaki sent 90 people here. So I thought 25 was a lot for the 25th anniversary. Now, Melinda, were you here in Hot Springs when the deer dancers came for the 5th anniversary? Were you a part of it then?
No, let's see. I had already moved to North Carolina, I believe. But I'm sure John was there with his wife. Yeah. And sent me photographs. And I was
wonderful,
happy to see them. And I read about everything going on in the Sentinel Record. Yeah, I keep my fingers in what's going on in Hot Springs all the time, because one of these days I'll be back.
Absolutely. And now we've talked a lot about the cultural exchange, but something you mentioned, Melinda, to begin with was economic exchange. Was there ever any pursuance of that economic exchange between our two cities, or from the very beginning?
Well, from the very beginning, yes. And the reason I say that is because we took tours. And I remember one in particular was a camera manufacturing company. We looked at technology there. We considered the agricultural products that are grown in and around Hanamaki. And I understand that there are people in Hot Springs who are interested in the sake industry, if we can brew beer, we can brew sake, right? Yes, and I don't know what has happened to that bit of information that I picked up several years ago. Where
Yes,
are we?
there are people interested in that. There are still people here interested in it. It just hasn't quite got the footage yet. Well, other than at my house, because my husband, Robert, and I, we brewed sake this spring. Part of our quarantine project was we brewed sake at home, and it was good. Not as good as Japanese sake, but it was very, very good.
I also understand that Mountain Valley water is sold there too. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. It's something that
売ってたけどね。
we talk about trade, but really there is economic impact from our sister city program here in Hot Springs, and I think in Hanamaki as well, from visitors, just because both of our cities really have a lot of tourism. And so when tourists come to a city and they stay in hotels and they spend money in the shops, there is economic impact from that, even if there isn't that initial trade economic impact that we talked about, or was one of the goals. Now, Ryuji-san, is there anything else that you would like to share about the Sister City program or exchanges from the early days up until now?
$9番あ、まあ、8番からいこうか。
Yeah, I think he was going to talk a little bit about the foundation, maybe, or how we facilitate exchange.
Yeah. He's written some notes because he has so many talks that he can give. So he's just saying, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the Sister City Foundation. So
okay.
私が知ってる限りでは、ホットスプリングスで、1998年ぐらいに姉妹都市基金を創設して、教員派遣研修が開始されたっていうふうに思っております。その時、2人の先生方が花巻を訪問して、花巻の教育制度や授業、課外活動などを研修して、帰国後にホットスプリングスの生徒に花巻市を紹介いただいて、いたと思っています。その一人として、姉妹都市基金の前会長のカーラムートン先生も花巻市を訪問されておりました。その後派遣される先生が増えたり、高校生の派遣や花巻祭りに市民訪問団が来られたりと、活動が活発になってきていると思います。また、メアリーさんが姉妹都市プログラムの、ディレクターに就任された以降、さらに新たな事業に取り組まれました。姉妹校提携の拡大、ロータリークラブの提携交流、画家の交換交流など、活発な交流が日本政府にも認められ、日本の国際親善、国際交流に寄与したことによって、表彰されているということは、特筆されるべきことだというふうに思っています。
Okay, so one of the things he wanted to talk about here was the Sister City Foundation, and he thinks, you could correct him if he's wrong, but he thinks it was about, it was 1998 when the Sister City Foundation was first established, and they started sending educators, teachers, as part of their first program initiatives, teachers from Hot Springs to Hanamaki. And two teachers back in during the first delegations, two of the teachers visited Hanamaki and kind of got to learn about the city's educational systems and their classes, the club activities, etc. And then when they went back to Hot Springs, they ended up bringing everything that they learned to teach their own kids. So it was a very helpful thing for the teachers to be able to experience this stuff firsthand so that they could teach their kids when they got back home. One of those teachers specifically was Carla Mooten, who was the former president. And after that, the number of teachers sent to Hanamaki started to increase. And eventually, high school students started joining in on the trips, as well as citizens, of course. And the citizens would come during Hanamaki Matsuri, the Hanamaki festival. And so it was around that time that exchange really started taking off in terms of like sending delegates to the city. And then of course, once Mary became coordinator of the Sister City program, we also started adding in all kinds of like new really cool initiatives. We had sister school partnerships, Rotary Club partnerships, artist exchanges, for example. And he also thinks it's worth noting that the Japanese government even recognized how active our exchange had become and how it contributed to international goodwill and like overall exchange between Japan and the U.S. So that's like a pretty big honor.
That is a huge honor. We're fortunate to have, in the way our sister cities are set up, in Japan, you have the international department that works for the city. You also have the International Exchange Association, which supports educational exchange and international exchange and international education. I've always admired that the Japanese government is such a huge supporter of having those international connections and learning about other cultures and wanting to share Japanese culture with people around the world as well. Here in Hot Springs, we do have the Sister City Foundation, which Ryuji-san mentioned was founded in, I think, 1998 is correct. And that, the nonprofit portion, we have a board of directors, and I know several of them are watching this evening, and they it's a volunteer board, and they support educational exchange. They send teachers every year. Student delegates were added in 2008, and just work very hard and dedicate a tremendous amount of their time and effort to support the goals and missions of the Sister City program. And we could not exist without that here. Because in Japan, we're fortunate there's departments for the city government. And here, part of my time is dedicated to the Sister City program. So we're very fortunate to have that group of volunteers with the Sister City Foundation, and so many volunteers that do that. And then he mentioned 2 of our sister schools that were signed during that 5th anniversary. Since then, we've added 2 more. Hot Springs Middle School, Junior High, they have a sister school in Japan. And then Arkansas School for Math, Science, and the Arts signed a sister city agreement with Hanamaki Kita just a few years ago. So we've seen that a lot of growth in that area over the past few years. Melinda, would you have ever thought in 1991 and 2, when this was first came up, that all of this could have happened because of those first conversations?
Well, it's been wonderful. By the way, I'll leave you with 2 economic development ideas: Kabuki theater,
Oh, nice.
and cruising around Japan. Now, if Hanamaki could do a deal with the cruise lines to provide all day or day over layover trips from the cruise ship into Hanamaki, I know they would love having that Japanese pizza that is served out in the farmlands of Hanamaki. People need the real Japanese experience. It's not all Tokyo, and it's not all beyond. It's real people.
Absolutely. Ryuji-san, do you have any ideas for future exchanges?
Not right now.
Okay.
先ほどメリンダさんもお話しされてましたけども、今は多くの中学生、高校生がホットスプリングスを訪問した経験を持って大人になっています。その人たちが将来家族と一緒にホットスプリングスを訪問してもらう、もしくは花巻に来てもらうというような交流が続いて、さらに活発な姉妹都市交流につながっていければいいんじゃないかなというふうに思っています。ライフステージによって新たに発見するものが異なります。そこから新たな交流も広がると思います。遠く離れた花巻とホットスプリングスではありますけども、きっと自分自身を成長させてくれる何かがそこにあるっていうふうに信じています。
So basically, so there's been a lot of students, people who were originally, when they came over to Hanamaki or came to Hot Springs, that were, kids at the time, that now are all grown up, and they're having their own families of their own. And overall, he thinks that really, like, the exchange between Hanamaki and Hot Springs is a fairly kind of exceptional case in terms of exchange that's conducted in the U.S. And again, they were recognized, nationally here in Japan as well. We have lots of students and citizens visiting each other's cities, and he hopes that many of those students will visit again with their families once they're all grown up, and can continue deepening that friendship as they have been doing. And he thinks that people end up having different experiences and kind of new discoveries depending on what stage of life they're in at the time, and that kind of helps keep our exchange expanding. So Hanamaki and Hot Springs might be separated by long distances, but he's convinced that there's something there that keeps us growing. There's something in that relationship that's kept us, on top of the exchanges conducted throughout the U.S. So.
Yeah, very, very true. And just a little surprise for both. I have a few photos that I wanted to share that might bring back a few minutes from the early beginning of the program. Can you pull up my screen? And let's see here. Present. There we go. Okay, so just jump in and tell us if you know what's going on here. Melinda?
Well, that was the last full evening of our first trip to Hanamaki, and I was scheduled to speak to all of the audience, and that was when I suggested to them that I would recommend to Hot Springs that we establish a relationship.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I know when we visit there, you mentioned rolling out the red carpet. There's always a beautiful banquet, the stage and the banners up in the back. And oh, look, that looks like that's Miss Linda Palmer, isn't it?
Yeah, that was the dancing. This was a surprise that we pulled on the Hanamaki folks. Our Japanese liaison in Little Rock taught us, a bunch of us ladies who were volunteering that first time, to dance the traditional dance that is always done. And she said, I won't tell anybody if you'll learn it. And then when the ladies start, just go on up to the stage and join them and see what happens. And what happened? We had a great time. And the audience just burst into applause and laughed and had a great time. It just totally broke the ice.
Well, and the tradition continues, because every time an adult delegation goes to Hanamaki, dancing is part of that banquet evening. We all end up dancing, and then are presented with lovely gifts. Usually our gifts are we're there for Matsuri, or the Hanamaki festival. So many times we're presented with a Matsuri jacket. So now, who is this, the delegation?
Yeah, this was the first delegation. Absolutely.
Okay.
And here's Jane and her late husband, Mike States. And behind them was a geisha who was the premier geisha at the geisha house the first night we were there for our introduction banquet. And the geishas sang and danced, and they served each of us individually as the hostess, our individual hostesses. And this is a wonderful, wonderful photograph. And the reason I really like it is because I have a photograph of that beautiful geisha sitting in front of me at that banquet, and I have it in my clock that I look at every day.
Oh, nice. Sounds lovely. What a very, very special treat. Many people in Japan haven't ever even been able to experience that. That truly was a very, very unique opportunity. Okay. And this, I bet, was this back in Hot Springs?
Oh, yes. This was the January 15th, 1993 official Sister City signing of the agreement. the mayor of Hanamaki, the mayor of Hot Springs, and it was witnessed by the mother of the president-elect Bill Clinton, who was going to be inaugurated within a few days from that ceremony. And it was a fabulous night.
Oh, wonderful.
This was a party that we had at the Stitt House for the delegation. And the food was fabulous. The music was great. And the Hanamaki guests entertained us with dancing and with hand clapping. And we exchanged gifts and sipped a lot of beverages. And everybody had a wonderful time. And it was a beautiful, beautiful party sponsored by Horst Fischer and his wife, Linda.
Oh, nice. Okay, who is this handsome fellow?
これは誰ですか？自分でしょ。
I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely him.
What was happening here?
で、この時は何がありました？
クリントン大統領がホットスプリングスカルチャーセンターのオープニングに参加するために来ていました。
President Bill Clinton was actually coming to the official opening of the Hot Springs Culture Center. There's some kind of ceremony going on.
Oh, excellent. Okay, was that in 1997 when you came?
1997年でした。
そうです。
Yes.
97年ですね。Hanamaki Display ね。
そうそう。Yeah, this is the Hanamaki Display that he was talking about earlier.
Okay, and it was at the mall. That's interesting. That would be.
Yeah. That was at Hot Springs. Was the official name Hot Springs Shopping Mall or something like that?
Yes.
全部手作りです。
And he said all of that was like made by hand. Like he was really impressed by how everybody kind of pitched in to put all that together, especially on short notice.
Oh, that's lovely. Okay, well, that's all of the stroll down memory lane with photos.
それで写真多いです。
Are there any questions, Paul? Did we have any questions before we have concluded our conclusions?
Well, the audience was pretty shy when it came to questions, but they weren't shy about showing their love and giving hellos. There's a ton of people: Herschel, Susie, Yoshi, Elizabeth. There's like 20 people saying hello, giving you a shout out, everyone. And I just want to thank everyone for doing a great job here. I have a final question for each of you. We'll start with our former mayor, Melinda Baran. Let's pretend for a moment there was a mayor exchange program, and you come back and we've had a mayor from Hanamaki here in Hot Springs for a couple weeks. What is one thing you would like to Hot Springs to have learned from Hanamaki, one change that could be made?
I would like to share my impressions of the excellent coordination of Hanamaki's governmental operations. Everybody works together. It's very different from the city management form of government, and with a lot more political interaction, I guess. But I really compliment Hanamaki's government for its extraordinary care of its citizens and its attention to sticking to their plans and not letting politics interfere with what they want their future to be. They get it done. And they give great parades. We really ought to have a great parade. That's about it, I think, right now. Mayor Ueda and I had wonderful conversations, and you're fortunate to have such a fine mayor. My congratulations to you all.
And Ryuji, I'm going to ask you the opposite question. What is something that Hanamaki could learn from Hot Springs?
いつも感じるのは、ホストファミリーの他にメアリーさんであったり、それ以外のスパペーサーズのメンバーの方だったり、行くことでいつでも温かく迎えてくれるっていうところが非常に日本と違う大きな心を持ってる部分なのかなっていうふうに感じています。私たちも心大きくホットスプリングスの人たちを迎え入れることができれば非常にいいんだろうなっていうふうに思います。
So when he thinks back about like the host families in Hot Springs and like coordinators like you, Mary, and everybody else involved in the program, like for example, he has experience with the spa pacers. He's got experience when he goes over there. He does running as part of that program. But he's basically said wherever he goes, whenever he goes, everybody gives them such a warm welcome, and he thinks it's somewhat different from how it is here in Japan. And there's kind of this like real sense of just immediately welcoming them into the community when they go over there. So he thinks that if there's something that we could kind of learn about here from Hot Springs, it would be that kind of immediate sense of just becoming friends like right away.
And then Jesse, I wanted to give you a shout out for doing a great job interpreting.
Thank you.
I have a question for you too. I'm sure we could have an entire program on what it's like to be an interpreter that people would be interested in. But just real briefly, would you explain what that process is like, translating English to Japanese?
Well, simultaneous interpretation is very different from translation. Translation is, written. So I can sit at a desk for 6 hours and really hammer out all the grammar and make sure I don't miss anything, Simultaneous interpretation, you got to sometimes cut corners, so to speak, or just get the gist of what's being said. If it's said really fast, you got to constantly be taking notes while everybody's speaking. And it's something that I don't envy. For example, the people who have to simultaneously interpret for the president of the United States or something like that, that would make me cry. It's okay, just because I'm in a comfortable environment here with everybody I know and you guys, so it's not a big deal for me. But it's tough work, yeah. Are
you Mr. Ryuji's regular interpreter, or does he have different?
Well, I am the translator and interpreter for the city of Hanamaki. So basically, whenever we have anybody like Mr. Sato here who comes over and works with us, usually it'll be me. We do have other like volunteer interpreters and stuff, but typically it's a big part of my job. So usually I'm first on the list for people that get asked to do it, just because that's what they pay me for, right? So.
There's a few other comments I would like to read off. Robert, I believe that's your husband, Mary. He says, "Miss seeing all of our Hanamaki friends this year. We can hardly wait to come see you again." And Paula says, "I have lovely memories of my visit to Hanamaki in 2005. My family was so fortunate to host 2 young men. Such a great experience. Thank you to both cities for such a wonderful program." And there was a question for you, Mary, from Lisa, who asked, are there any sister city events planned for 2021?
Well, there are virtual ones. The last Friday or the last Wednesday of each month, like this one, the next one will be on March 24th. We'll be doing virtual programming. And I'm open for any ideas for exchanges or suggestions. So please, Hot Springs Sister City Program Facebook page, you can send me a message or make a comment on there, or the email address is hotspringssistercity@yahoo.com, and you can send me a message there. Hopefully we will take part in exchanges. So much depends on COVID. We want everybody to be safe. That's our primary concern. We were supposed to have sent a delegation of students in June. By now we would have received several delegations of students. over the past year, but all of that has been put on hold until we can safely move about and travel again. So we just continue to hope for safety and the vaccinations. We were earlier, or a few months ago, we received a special gift from Hanamaki, some beautiful masks that were designed, and 100 of them sent to us. Again, that's part of our sister city exchange. It's when your relative is hurting, you want to help them. And that's the same with our sister city. 10 years ago, when the tsunami and earthquake hit, we reached out to help them. When we are being impacted by COVID, they reach out to help us, and they sent us 100 masks, which many of them went to the Japanese students at ASMSA. We were very fortunate to add language programs to teach Japanese language and culture at ASMSA, and for a couple of years at Lakeside as well. Thanks to the sister city relationship and the experiences that educators had, and saw the importance of language education for multiple years. And so thanks to that, those exchanges, those developed out of that. So but back to the question, that it's virtual exchanges or an art exchange, where I know we're going to exchange art this summer. So,
and speaking of ASMSA, we just got a comment from Elizabeth who says ASMSA, our math and science school here in Hot Springs, and Hanamaki Kita have been participating in a virtual exchange this year.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Betty. I forgot, I should have mentioned that one, but yeah, Betty's great. She's the Japanese teacher at ASMSA.
And then Amy, in regards to the masks, says they are beautiful. I see students wearing them often.
Oh, great. That's good.
One last question I have for you, Mary. You mentioned earlier you would like to see more displays of culture in the Hanamaki side like we have here. From there, would you have any ideas for what you'd like to?
Oh yeah, lots of ideas. Artist exchange, we've done that once before, but there's so many opportunities for that. We are an artist community here in Hot Springs. I would also, the arts, not just visual arts, but performing arts. I mean, how many jazz musicians and blues musicians do we have here that is a unique, those are both uniquely American musical forms that would be very interesting to the people in Hanamaki. Also, Native American dance. For the 25th anniversary, we brought a troupe of Quapaw dancers to Hot Springs to perform for our visitors from Hanamaki. We also did a baseball exchange last year in 2019, and I would like to reciprocate. They brought an entire baseball team here from Lakeside Sister School, Hanamaki Higashi. I would love to send an entire baseball team to Hanamaki so that they could play baseball on Japanese soil. So yeah, I've got lots of ideas. So we're fortunate that we have some enthusiastic board and support here in Hot Springs. And hopefully we'll be able to make many of those things come true.
Excellent. Okay, last thing from me on the library side, and then I'll let you close us, Mary. We had said at the beginning of the program, we hope that this is going to be the first installment in an ongoing series hosted and collaborated between the library and the Sister City program. So we have a date for the next one, which is the last Wednesday in February, the 24th, same time, 6 p.m. Do you have a preview of that or any hints of what you might expect for that program?
Still, it's going to focus on some of the exchanges, probably educational exchange and how that's impacted those participants.
And we'll have a more formal announcement details of that in the coming days or a week or so. From the library, I thank you to our special guest, our former mayor, Miss Melinda Baran.
Thank you.
And then Mr. Ryuji Sato and your translator, Jesse, thank you very much for joining us so early in the morning where you're at. Really appreciate you.
And for those interested in learning more Japanese, Jesse also teaches Japanese online. So Jesse, how would anybody do that?
Well, my name is Valen Hark. I stream over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Valen Hark, and I have a YouTube channel. If you search Valen Hark, it's VALENHARKE, then that'll pop up. It's free. You don't have to pay to learn Japanese. So if you can put up with my stupid streams, then you can learn the language.
Oh, they're great, Jesse. You have a wonderful sense of humor. I've learned hiragana thanks to Jesse, so I'm going to move on from that. But anyway, so just wanted to have a shout out for Jesse.
Thank you so much.
Hop on that. Maybe we can do a library exchange program. Hint, hint.
Oh,
sure.
That's a great idea. Was there anything else that Ryuji-san or from Hanamaki or from?
Sayonara.
Yeah. More.
Well, yeah, I think he's got a little bit of just a
yeah.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
まあ、毎年定型の調査団や調印式に参加された方々の中にはもう亡くなっている方や疎遠になっている方がいらっしゃいます。まあ、今の花巻とホットスプリングスの姉妹都市の礎を築いていただいたことで、活発な交流を継続できているものと感謝しています。まあ、特にもミッキーさんが11月23日に亡くなられたことについては非常に悲しく残念に思っています。2年後には姉妹として計30周年を迎えます。コロナウイルスの感染が収束して訪問し合えるようになることを心から願っておりますとともに、30周年で皆さんとまたお会いし、喜び合えることを願っています。
Yeah, so just some parting words that he'd like to leave you guys with. There's some people from back in the original days of our exchange and from, the first official signing ceremony that have, passed away. And there's also other people that have gone and moved on and are no longer part of the program that might have been part of it back in the original days. But he's really grateful to everybody, no matter if they're participating now or back in the day or if they've passed on, of course, for everything that they did to lay the foundation for the sister city relationship between Hanamaki and Hot Springs, and for basically everybody who has been keeping it strong to this day. And especially Mickey has passed away recently these past few days. And he was, of course, very saddened to hear that. And she was, of course, another instrumental figure in this. So definitely wanted to mention her. But yeah, around 2 years from now, we'll be welcoming the 30th anniversary. So he really hopes that the whole COVID situation is over by then. And really, because we really want to be able to see everyone again. I mean, I think everybody thinks that, but for everyone to be able to meet for the anniversary celebration would be, the best thing for us. So.
Thank you. And I echo that. Our program exists as today because so many people worked hard on it. Mayor Baran, Mayor Yoshida was the mayor, I believe, at the time, and Mr. Odeshima, who was the kind of the leader of the international department there. Our sister city leadership, the foundation leadership here in Hot Springs. There's so many board members that have worked so hard. So I just we exist now because of all of the dedication and commitment and vision of those who started the program in the early 90s and have dedicated their hearts and passion to making sure that it exists so that others can also be participants in it and reap the benefits of cultural exchange. So, thank you so much, Paul, for having our program tonight. We really appreciate it. It's nice to have a format for it. We've all suffered from not being able to exchange in person. So this gives us a format to do so virtually.
Absolutely. We'll keep being that for you. We'll keep being a platform for these types of programs. And thank you, Mary. You did a great job organizing all of this and presenting the program tonight. So, and I'm sure you'll continue to do a great job with that and the Sister City program. So thank you. And thank you to everyone tonight for the roles you played in getting this together, and hope it has a beautiful next 30 or so years and beyond.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
And thank you everyone for watching.
Good night.
Good night.